Matt, I've been singing your praises all day, man. You did a great job on the Locked On Kings podcast last night. You did a great job covering the draft for the Sacramento Kings. Hopefully, I don't forget anything I want to ask you because you can provide a whole lot of insight into what happened last night. So let's start here. How did the Kings settle on 24 and Nick Crawford? Because you made it clear they had a couple of players in mind and a couple of spots in line.
Yeah, they came into the draft with a list of names. I know pretty high on that list was Walter Clayton Jr. They had an eye on him. Nick Clifford, of course, was on the list. Asa Newell was also pretty high on that list as well, to where the Kings actually almost made a play for Asa Newell around that 21 spot. They were talking to Washington around that 21 spot to potentially to jump up there to take him. But I think I've heard like a potential of like some kind of medical thing or like a little spook or a little scare. I don't think it's anything too extreme because he got taken 23rd, the pick before the Sacramento Kings. And then they ultimately landed on Nick being there. But yeah, they had a list, and they, like Scott Perry said in his press conference, and I thought Scott was very transparent in his press conference, which was a breath of fresh air. He talked about like there were preliminary conversations. The Kings had talked to multiple teams from Brooklyn to Washington to even potentially Miami to Oklahoma City, even going into the draft, to kind of at least set the understanding or have an idea of what a trade would look like, circumstances, and kind of a baseline or a foundation, so that when there were 5 minutes on the clock and things were happening fast, they could come up with a deal quickly. So it sounded like, I mean, there was already a conversation between Presti and Perry around that 24th pick and what it would look like. And the Kings decided to pounce when they realized Clifford would be there. And they ended up getting a first round pick. And Scott Perry starts his tenure as the general manager, his first player personnel move. He goes out and gets a rookie, which I think is really important for a general manager, to go out and kind of get the first player that they select, right? Like the entire roster as it stands right now is not Scott's roster. Doesn't mean he's getting rid of all of them, but that's not his team. He's inherited them. Nick Clifford is the first player that he has chosen to say, I want that guy on my team. So I think that's an important first step, and you'll learn a lot about a general manager by who they select. And I think we learned a whole heck of a lot about Scott Perry on how he moved into the first round, how he handled last night, which I thought he did a brilliant job.
Matt, did you think going into last night that they were going to get into that first round? I know myself and Damian, we didn't. James Ham was saying, it's a good chance, 80% chance. And throughout the night, I was like, I don't think it's going to happen. But were you always kind of convinced that they were going to eventually find their way back into that first round?
I think the hesitation was, from what I heard, was just the belief that the guys on their list wouldn't be there. And they started dropping really quickly in that late teens range. We started, like we saw Walter Clayton go down. I mean, we started to see some of these guys that we know are high on the Kings board or on the Kings list start to go pretty quickly in quick succession. And I think the Kings felt like that was going to happen. And if they started dropping in those teens range, that was an area that it was going to take more than I think the Kings were comfortable giving up to move up to get, right? So I think the Kings always felt that 24 or 26, 27 range, because Brooklyn had 2 picks around there, which, by the way, the fact that Brooklyn didn't trade any of their 5 first rounder and they made 5 selections is pretty crazy. Good for Jordy. He's going to have a young basketball team, I suppose. But I think the Kings knew or felt pretty confident that they'd be able to get a deal done in that range. The question was always, will any of the guys that we want be there at that spot? So, like, even if Nick Clifford wasn't the top of their list, they still were not confident or not sure. And we've seen a lot of mock drafts not have Nick there at 24. So I think that was the hesitation, that the Kings weren't just going to move into the first round and move into the first round. That's why Scott Perry didn't make a trade for a first round pick weeks ago or days ago, because why would he? Like, you have more information on draft night. A draft pick is more valuable on draft night than any other time because you have information of who's going. So that's why he decided to pounce. He was patient, but attacked when he felt he could get a pick and get his guy there, and he executed it pretty flawlessly.
Do you think we're in for a boring night tonight? Pretty chalk draft. Keep it moving.
Compared to last night, yes. I mean, I've seen the conversations and the possibilities of what if the Kings trade their second round pick, and unless you're adding that as a sweetener to a much bigger deal that doesn't have to happen on draft night, I'm not expecting fireworks. I'm curious who they're going to take, and I don't have as good of an indication as I had last night about guys that are on their list or names that they're high on their board. But this is the range of all the guys that they brought in to Sacramento for pre-draft workouts, right? That's this range. So any of those names that they worked out could go here, or maybe some that they didn't work out. Like they never worked out Nick Clifford. They had a conversation with him at the draft combine, but that was it. So they can go in any which direction. So I'm more from the viewership standpoint. For me, I'm going to be monitoring and paying attention to what I can pay attention to. But I think tonight's kind of a sit back and see what Scott is looking for and what kind of project or depth he's going to prioritize with that pick if he makes a selection there.
Just speaking of Matt George, what would you like to see the Kings target with this 42 pick position, skill level play? Like who are you looking to guard? Like I'm point guard hunting. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, point guard is the most obvious weakness on this roster, or I shouldn't say weakness. I should say like there's just no depth at the point guard position on this roster. How much are you going to address it with the 42nd, 43rd pick? Like I don't really look at like you have to take a point guard here because you have no point guard depth. To me, it's like I'm all for the Kings going out and getting another 6'8", 6'9" guy that's kind of like an Isaac Jones, and maybe he turns into something. I don't know. Like I think the Kings could always just use more athleticism. So go out and try and find like an athlete that impressed you. But I don't think I really have too much of a preference. I would be a bad general manager because I don't value second round picks very highly. I know you can get diamonds in the rough and you can find great guys in the second round, and teams have done that. I don't put a lot of stock in second round picks. I'm more like, okay, when you make a selection, I'm curious about the player and about their journey, but I'm not really name hunting for the second round at this point in time. So I don't have super high of expectations for this pick tonight. Again, it's more curiosity of what direction Scott goes in, and then we'll monitor that pick that more than likely will spend time either in the G League or as a two-way player. That's pretty much the extent, Casey, of like how I guess dialed in I am to the second round pick for the Kings tonight.
Let's jump into part 2 of the Locked On Kings podcast that you did last night. And you talked a little bit about what the future might look like for this basketball team. And that future might be within the next handful of days. Of course, the future could be as early tonight, but as free agency beginning on Monday, there could be a lot of moving parts over the course of the next couple of days or so. Started last night, the trade to get into the first round, grabbing Nick Clifford, a guy who can play at the 2, a guy who can play at the 3, a pretty versatile player who come off your bench. We speculated he could potentially be a 6-man, 7th man. Drake, you confirmed that. He thinks that's the type of player that he is. That's obviously high praise, too. That's a rotational player. That's a really solid player when you're drafted there at 24. But we're starting to get our first glimpse as to what Scott Perry likes in particular players. And I'm wondering, Matt, what that may have told you about the future for some guys on Sacramento right now.
Yeah, I think that's what's important to kind of touch on here is, like I said earlier, this is not Scott Perry's roster. He inherited it. So we're talking from the perspective of a lot of us, we being like myself too. Like I've been very consistent and I was very open, whether it was on this show or on the podcast coming into this offseason, where I thought I would be shocked if DeMar DeRozan were still here. Like I've said that multiple times on the podcast. I thought it made sense for both sides, the Kings and DeMar, to move on. But that's coming from the perspective of someone who has followed this team closely and had last year's context. And Scott Perry is coming in with a fresh mindset. He has his own, of course, opinions and preconceived notions of players and stuff like that. And he's been around the league a long time. But it's about who Scott Perry likes, who Scott Perry values. And from what conversations that I've had, reading the tea leaves of the players that he values, he's been very vocal repeatedly about the character traits of players that he wants to have here in Sacramento. It's starting to become more clear that DeMar DeRozan might not be going anywhere. And in fact, like one of the things I said last night, because this is a mixture of things that I've heard plus kind of common sense, is you brought in another 6'5", 6'6" guy. Nick Clifford is a 2-3. He's not in front, of course, of Lavine, DeRozan, or Malik. He's not in front of Keon, and the Kings have a decision to make about Keon coming up here, but I feel pretty good about what the Kings are going to do there. So in theory, like one of those three that I listed, DeMar, Lavine, and Malik, has to go. And again, I've heard similar rumblings. And if you were to take all contract context off the table, and it is a schoolyard pick, and here you have in front of you DeMar, Lavine, Malik. You can only pick one of them. I think Scott Perry's first choice is DeMar DeRozan at this point. So Lavine, now with the context of the contract, really hard to move right now. I think we know this. So I don't think Lavine's going anywhere. So now it becomes DeMar or Malik. Again, I think Scott Perry would prefer to have DeMar at this point in time. So the possibility of Malik being traded, I think, is definitely increased to potentially even a likelihood over the last few days or week as we start to learn more about who Scott Perry likes and values for this team going forward, whether it's short-term or long-term.
What do you think about Devin Carter? Because his name has been mentioned mostly by us, I guess, but I've seen different trade scenarios where he might be involved. Like, what do you think the Kings are feeling about Devin Carter and continuing to keep him around?
I think Devin Carter was one of the players, maybe the main or only player that the Kings were really making available in move-up trade talks last night. And I think it's fair to assume that there's not much of a market out there for Devin Carter. And guys, I think we also might have overestimated the market for Malik Monk as well. And I've seen the rumors and I've seen the reports and trying to find out as much as I can, as we all are, about this Malik Monk Toronto Raptors, if that makes sense, because Emmanuel Quickley certainly should be someone the Kings are monitoring if they feel that they could get him, or even RJ Barrett to some extent. But I've gotten indications, plus just kind of just understanding where the Kings are at, where other teams are at. And while $18 million felt like a bargain deal for us here in Sacramento, with so many teams dealing with the aprons and fears of the aprons and everything like that, $18 million is not anything to just say, yeah, we can just take that on. I don't know if Malik Monk's market is as prolific as at least I thought it would be coming into this offseason. I figured, and even going back to a handful of weeks ago, I would figure like Malik Monk is one of the not easiest guys for the Kings to move, but someone that the Kings could use for a value trade because he's a good basketball player and he's on a pretty reasonable deal. But the more that we hear, the less it sounds like Malik has a ton of suitors, although anything could change at any given time. Just because he doesn't have a lot of suitors around draft time doesn't mean he won't have more suitors around free agency or even a week into free agency.
Man, I think you know this. A source may have shared with you as well. That market for Malik last year wasn't there. There was one other team. There was one other team. The person didn't tell me the team. I assumed it was Detroit. I come to think about it. It doesn't matter. I assumed it was Detroit, but we thought, oh, it could be Orlando. It could be. Wasn't there.
I also think we need to
use the phrase. I know for a fact Malik used the phrase "money dried up." So it
I
might
also
not have been the market we thought, or it wasn't the market.
I don't think we should be so liberal with the phrase or term Malik turned down more money to stay here in Sacramento as much as I've seen it used. I'm not saying that is completely untrue, but I don't think like there's a narrative out there, and I understand Malik's a fan favorite. I like Malik a lot. Personally, I would not hate at all for Malik Monk to still be a Sacramento King. I think he's an incredible, valuable six man. I think he's one of the best six men in the league. We've seen that. Does he want to still play that position now that he got a taste of starting? I don't know. Doug Christie was pretty vocal about when he took the interim job that Malik came to him and said, whatever you need me to do, I'll do, and handled things the right way. So maybe that's a good indication going forward. But I think like a lot of Kings fans have used this idea that Malik chose to stay in Sacramento and turned down multiple different offers out there that would have made him higher paid because he wanted to be the pizza guy and he loved it here in this city. And he loves Sacramento. I believe that wholeheartedly. I don't know how much I'm buying or how much I think it's been overstated. Let's put it that way. I think it's been overstated that he turned down a significant amount of money to remain a Sacramento King.
So I'll ask both of you guys if that Devin Carter market wasn't what they thought. You know, they were just trying to get into the draft, let alone get a player.
Yeah.
And that was kind of iffy. And the Malik Monk market isn't what they thought.
Run it back.
But say, what the hell? What you gonna do?
Yeah.
What you gonna do as far as making moves and moving this roster around? Matt, is it realistic that they may be forced to run it back to a certain degree?
I have been consistent with, and I know D'Lo hates this term, and I'm sorry. I've been pretty consistent with my belief that next season is a gap year. Like next season is just what it is. And I think there's kind of a similar belief within this Kings front office right now. That's not that they're just going to punt on next season and next season doesn't matter, because using this, and we can talk about this too, guys, like using this mindset or understanding of what we believe next season to be, Dennis Schroeder makes a lot of sense. So we can go down that road if you guys want to go down that road. But I think there's kind of an understanding or a belief in this front office, as there should be in my mind, that next season is just kind of like, all right, we'll run not everything back. You're not just going to copy and paste the roster, because I do think Scott will make some moves. I think they're going to be fringe moves. I don't think there's going to be like the star hunting, I think, is off the table. Like, I don't think we've seen there's no interest in Trae Young. Like, that was something that I think Sam Amick also kind of reported. The Kings aren't like big contract hunting right now. I have zero indication that that's been the case. So I think they look at next season as it is what it is. We'll run out.
Don't do it. Don't do it, Matt.
We're going to run out 1 more year of Zach Lavine's contract. Maybe we make another push for the playoffs via the play-in. We get maybe a better indication of certain aspects of our roster, from Keegan Murray to Keon Ellis to Nick Clifford to any of these guys. And then once you go into next offseason, where Perry has that context and Lavine now only has 1 year left on his deal, and DeMar only has half a season, half partial guaranteed final year of his deal, or even the trade deadline. Guys, there's no reason to believe that Perry won't use DeMar at the trade deadline to trade to a team that maybe feels like they're a go-to scorer away from making a push, right? It makes perfect sense to me that DeMar's value might be higher at the deadline than it is right now, especially with his final year partially guaranteed. So just because the Kings aren't doing anything right now doesn't mean they won't do anything next season. But I genuinely think next season is a gap year, D'Lo. And I think there are people in the front office that kind of feel the same. They have patience on their side. There's not the same win now pressure on the shoulders of Scott Perry as there was with Monty McNair, nor should there be. And the fact that I'm hearing these things and feeling this way actually it makes me feel better, not about next season, but it makes me feel better about this front office, that they're looking around, they're recognizing the very real position that this roster and this organization is at, and they're not willing to just make a swing for the sake of making a swing to try and turn a mess of very, very talented players into a playoff basketball team in a Western Conference that is just getting better and better and better.
Gross. That's just gross. But I hate that optimistic Matt returned because the Kings might be on a gap year.
Well, hold on, because
did he return?
There's going to be, there are going to be nights where
he sounded in 3 months.
Well, I am very happy about what Scott Perry did last night. I was very impressed with Scott last night. I was very impressed. I thought he handled that trade brilliantly. I thought the assets that he gave up, I thought last night was a very strong indication of who Scott Perry is and will be as a general manager. He had the right amount of patience, but also attacked when he felt it was time to attack. Not too much patience, and he didn't jump the gun. I was impressed by that. We don't know how Nick Clifford's going to play out. That judgment is saved for a few years from now. But that was the first indication we got of Scott Perry as a general manager when it came to player personnel moves. And I was very encouraged by that. But that doesn't mean I'm excited about next season. I'm not.
Can I throw a little monkey wrench of sorts at your theory? Can you, if you're not trying to, okay, let me start at the beginning. You don't believe Monty McNair in that front office executed the Zack Lavine trade, correct?
I think there was very heavy ownership influence, but ultimately McNair made the call, I guess.
He made the call with but almost under orders to make the call.
That's okay. I think that's pretty well understood.
The Zack Lavine move was a win now move. Everybody agree? Why would that be different today? Because Zack Lavine is still very much on this roster. The roster is the same. Why would that not be the case now?
Because they fell short. Because the win now, they didn't win now. They made it to the play-in again and then got embarrassed on their home floor in the play-in. And I think there was a pretty quick realization around that organization that maybe it wasn't the right move. And then you brought in a general manager that I think we all know pretty well wouldn't have made that move, right? And Perry, this is not his first rodeo, right? He's a seasoned veteran general manager, and the Kings didn't hold a vast interview process. They wanted Perry, and I think Perry's only accepting this job if he has the confidence that he is going to have two things specifically. One, the final say within reason, right? Or ownership still has to sign off on anything that's common around the league. That's not a Vivek thing. That's common around the league. But he's he makes the call. And two, that he has the time to right the ship, right? He has time to clean up the mess. Yeah. So I'm operating with the belief that he has bare minimum those two caveats that any new general manager should realistically have, especially one who is as seasoned as Perry. And I think all of us can feel pretty confident in saying Perry would not have made that move. Now, the Kings will still be competitive next season, in my opinion. Perry, more than likely, will want this team to be as competitive as possible. And if, as constructed, they can be a playoff team, great, fantastic. But I think Perry, like myself and others, looks at this roster and realizes that while short term they might be able to do something that's interesting, long term, you don't look at this roster with any kind of long-term confidence or cohesiveness at this point. You don't. And it's not just because, these players don't work together. It's because one of them's 35, 36 years old in DeMar. One of them is Zack Lavine, who's coming to the end of his contract. Domas just started his new contract, but you're looking at a star who's hesitant to score the basketball. So, he looks at this roster with common sense, the same way you and I do, and go, there's not sustainable success here. So the Kings were trying to win now last season. There was a playoff mandate last season. They fell short. A new regime comes in here, looks around and goes, yeah, winning now ain't it. with this group. At least those are the tea leaves that I read. And that's me projecting a lot of myself and my opinions and my feelings into it too. This is not all stuff that I'm hearing. This is a lot of just me and my opinions on the situation.
Yeah, you're allowed to have an opinion. It's okay. It's all right. Share your opinion. Someone might just repeat it a few hours later, but go ahead, man.
Verbatim.
I'm just saying it happens.
Oh,
Undertaker!
No! Undertaker!
Who is it? Oh, wait a minute! What the?
For the
Where is he?
audience, the lights just went out like the Undertaker was on his way to get Matt George.
I'm about to get tombstoned by Monty McNair.
Yeah. About to get tombstoned by Kevin John.
Uh,
Yeah, you could take Kevin. It's fine. He's too happy.
The other thing about that, and you kind of laid it out too, Matt, when you talk about like the mandate to win now, I still think the team has a lot of talent. Like if they came back with a lot of the guys that they had from last year, including DeMar DeRozan, I think there's a lot of talent on that roster, man. And, and last year was just a wild ride, man. I think I'm not saying that's the end all be all. There were things where just people just didn't play well, and maybe there were some chemistry issues, but it was a wild ride last year, and that's got to account for something. That's got to play a factor into something. And they were, a play-in team last year, and I think this year with a little bit more cohesion, if you did come back with those guys, you have a better chance of doing something than you did last year. So they could still, to what Matt was talking about, they can still win games even if they kind of run it back.
So there's a couple things that you said there that I think are really, really important, Casey. First off, you're right. All of us, including ownership, coaching staff, front office, could easily go, okay, what does a full season of Lavine and DeRozan and Domas look like without a star demanding a trade and a coach being fired in December? Now that there's no fear of, we know Doug Christie's going to have the job, right? What does a full season of that look like? Those factors absolutely play a factor. I think I don't think that's enough to go into the season with confidence, but that is certainly a factor. The other thing that you said there, though, Casey, and it actually goes back to one of your earlier questions. You talk about the amount of talent on this roster. Jake Fisher referenced the same thing earlier on your guys' show. There is a ton of talent on this roster, which might play into the majority of it being run back. Why? Because the Kings and Perry are not just going to get rid of it for the sake of getting rid of it. Like, that's how I look at the Malik Monk situation. If Malik Monk doesn't have a great market, and I've heard like rumors of a trade, or a super lowball offer from the Miami Heat, if Malik's market isn't as good as we think it is, even if Perry's not the biggest fan of Malik, bring him back. I don't just trade him for scraps at this point in time. And wait and see. It's the patience thing that I preached with De'Aaron Fox, right? If DeMar DeRozan's market right now, if you really like DeMar DeRozan, which I very much believe Scott Perry likes DeMar DeRozan, I think Scott Perry likes Domantas Sabonis a lot too. But if Scott Perry, one, really likes DeMar, and two, he doesn't feel like he could get what DeMar is valued for right now, he's not willing to play Pat Riley's game with Miami or whatever, or they can't get Kuminga from the Warriors or whatever, then wait till the trade deadline and reevaluate not just where you're at, but where every other team in the league is at, especially a team in the Eastern Conference that's looking at the conference is wide freaking open right now because 3 stars in the East all went down with the same injury and are going to be out the entire year, right? That context matters. Patience is a card that I feel Scott Perry has now that Monty didn't have last season because Monty overplayed the patience card the 2 seasons before that, if that makes sense. So you have all this talent. Sure, you don't want all of it on your roster, or you don't look at all of this talent as the core of my team going forward. But I'm not just going to dump Malik Monk or dump DeMar DeRozan and give an asset away for scraps because the Kings are too talented to do that. It's a weird spot to be in, but it's a spot where patience, I think, is more important.
All right, man, Matt George.
Cooking.
He is, man. You got to stay, well, I guess pun intended. Got to stay locked in. Stay locked on. Matt George is shooting something. I'm not sure.
No, it's like my zinger, like the product. I don't know. Is it cool? It wasn't cool. I'm sorry.
No. Oh my God. No, that was not. Did you think that was cool?
No. I called Neat Clifford my guy last night after Jake Gaden called Neat Clifford my guy, and I felt like an idiot. I said it, and like, thank God the Zoom of Neat Clifford is only focused on him, because if it were me, you would see my face like physically cringe when I said it. Like I was like, oh, then my guy. I was like, oh God. So anyway, that's how I'm doing.
Oh, Matt, I love you, buddy. Let's just get out of here and let Matt. Well, you can't get rest, man. We got another round to cover tonight.
That's right.
Great stuff, Matt George. You're killing it over on Locked On Kings and, of course, ABC 10. Coverage of the second round of the NBA draft begins in just about 30 minutes. And, of course, we'll recap it all beginning tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on the Insiders here on Sacramento Sports Leader, ESPN 1320.
Vamos, Scott Perry.